Imagine a world. Not the world we know, with its defined borders and established empires, but a vast and complex mosaic of civilizations that flourished and fell in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, in the heart of the ancient Near East. Think of the 6th century BCE, an era of intense transformation, colossal empires, and incessant conflicts that shaped the history of humanity. It was a land of ancient city-states, powerful kingdoms, and peoples who, for centuries, fought for dominion and survival. The air was charged with palpable tension. Empires rose and fell, leaving behind grandiose ruins and complex legacies. The Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, each left their mark, building magnificent cities, developing writing and legal systems, and expanding their power through conquest. Life was shaped by agriculture, trade, and, inevitably, war. The search for fertile lands, trade routes, and resources was constant, leading to conflicts that would redefine the borders and destinies of entire peoples. This is not just a tale of kings and kingdoms, but the saga of an era writhing under the weight of ambitions, of an ancient power that would be challenged by an unexpected force. And at the center of this storm, a figure would emerge who, with his military genius, political vision, and remarkable humanity, would shape the destiny of a new empire, creating a legacy that would echo for millennia and make him known as the Great.
To understand Cyrus's rise and the transformation of the Near East, it is essential to revisit the power that dominated the region for centuries before him, the Neo-Assyrian Empire. In the 7th century BCE, Assyria was the terror of the ancient East. Its empire, stretching from Egypt to the Persian Gulf, was built on brutal conquest and relentless exploitation. The Assyrians were masters of war, with a professional and well-organized army known for its cruelty and terror tactics. Assyrian cities like Nineveh and Ashur were imposing fortresses adorned with reliefs that glorified their military victories and the subjugation of their enemies. They pioneered siege tactics, using battering rams and towers to breach city defenses. Their policy of mass deportation, where entire populations were removed from their lands and resettled in other regions of the empire, aimed to break resistance and ensure control. However, Assyrian brutality generated deep hatred among the subjugated peoples. Their empire, though vast, was maintained by force and fear, and lacked a basis of loyalty or cultural integration. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylonians and Medes, weary of Assyrian tyranny, united and destroyed Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, marking the end of the Assyrian Empire. Its fall was celebrated by all oppressed peoples, a sign that even the most powerful could be overthrown.
The end of the Assyrian Empire created a power vacuum in the Near East, which would be quickly filled by new powers. The Babylonians, under Nebuchadnezzar II, rebuilt their empire, and the Medes, an Iranian people who had been one of the main architects of the Assyrian downfall, established their own kingdom, which would become a dominant force in the region. In this scenario of change and new hegemonies, the man who would unite these peoples and build an even greater empire, an empire that would be remembered for its tolerance and wisdom, would be born. With the fall of the Assyrian Empire, a new power emerged on the Iranian plateau, the Median Empire. The Medes, an Iranian people related to the Persians, had played a crucial role in the destruction of Nineveh and the liberation of many peoples oppressed by the Assyrians. Under the leadership of their king, Cyaxares, the Medes established a vast empire that stretched from the Iranian plateau to Asia Minor. The Median Empire was a formidable military power with a well-organized army and powerful cavalry. They were masters of war and diplomacy, capable of forging alliances and expanding their dominion through conquest.
Their capital, Ecbatana, was a magnificent city with palaces and fortifications that rivaled those of the great cities of Mesopotamia. The Medians and Babylonians, who had been allies in the fall of Assyria, divided the territories of the old Assyrian Empire. The Medes controlled the northern and eastern lands, while the Babylonians controlled the southern and western lands. This alliance between Medes and Babylonians ensured the stability of the region and prevented the resurgence of any power that could threaten their hegemony. However, the Median Empire, though powerful, was still relatively young and lacked the administrative sophistication and vast resources of later empires. Its culture was rich in Iranian traditions, with an emphasis on cavalry, hunting, and tribal loyalty. The Zoroastrian religion, with its duality between good and evil, began to influence Median thought, promoting values of truth, justice, and order. In this scenario of a new power emerging in the Near East, a man would be born who, though of Persian lineage, would grow up in the Median court and who, one day, would unite the Iranian peoples and build an even greater empire, an empire that would be remembered for its tolerance and wisdom, and that would forever change the face of the ancient world.
It was in this transforming Near East, where the Median Empire was emerging and the memory of Assyrian tyranny still lingered, that sometime around 590 BCE or 576 BCE, Cyrus, the future great, was born. He came into the world in a noble Persian family, part of the Achaemenid dynasty, which was a vassal of the Median Empire. His arrival in the world was shrouded in legends and omens, as was common for great leaders of antiquity. The most famous legend, told by the Greek historian Herodotus, states that Cyrus's maternal grandfather, Astyages, the king of the Medes, had a premonitory dream that his daughter Mandane would give birth to a son who would dethrone him and rule all of Asia. Fearing this prophecy, Astyages ordered his newborn grandson to be killed. However, the man entrusted with the task, Harpagus, a Median general, could not bring himself to carry out the order. Instead, he gave the baby to a shepherd, Mithridates, and his wife, who raised him as their own son in the mountains. Cyrus grew up as a shepherd, unaware of his true lineage, learning the skills of rural life and leading other boys in games and play. This humble childhood, far from the royal court, forged in Cyrus a strong, independent personality, with an understanding of the common people's lives. The legend of his birth and miraculous survival reflects the idea that Cyrus was a man of destiny, predestined for great deeds. His upbringing, though not formal like that of a royal prince, taught him resilience, cunning, and the ability to lead. He was a man of great charisma and remarkable intelligence who would stand out among his peers. His true identity would be revealed later, when he was already a young adult, and his grandfather's prophecy would begin to come true. The stage was set for the emergence of a leader who, through his military genius, political vision, and humanity, would unite the Iranian peoples and build an empire that would be remembered for its tolerance and wisdom, and that would forever change the course of world history. His journey was just beginning, and the Near East awaited to be transformed by his vision. Cyrus's childhood, far from the luxuries of the Median royal court, was spent in the mountains, alongside a shepherd and his wife. This humble life, in direct contact with nature and common people, was a period of fundamental learning that would shape his personality and worldview. Cyrus grew up as a shepherd, tending flocks, learning to live off the land, and dealing with the challenges of rural life. He learned the practical skills of country life, hunting, tracking animals, surviving in hostile environments, and protecting flocks from predators. This experience gave him a deep understanding of nature and its cycles, and an appreciation for the simplicity of life.
He also learned to lead other boys in games and play, showing early on his ability to organize and inspire. This humble childhood, in contrast to the life of a royal prince, forged in Cyrus a strong, independent personality with an understanding of the common people's lives. He was not a distant aristocrat, but a man who knew the realities of daily life, the difficulties and the aspirations of ordinary people. This experience would give him an empathy and an ability to connect with different social classes, which would be crucial for his future leadership. The legend of his birth and miraculous survival, though perhaps exaggerated, reflects the idea that Cyrus was a man of destiny, predestined for great deeds. His upbringing, though not formal like that of a royal prince, taught him resilience, cunning, and the ability to lead. He was a man of great charisma and remarkable intelligence, who would stand out among his peers. His childhood as a shepherd was the crucible where the future conqueror and visionary would be forged, preparing him for the role he would play in history. The legend of Cyrus the Great reaches its most dramatic point with the discovery of his true lineage, a moment that would transform him from a simple shepherd into a prince destined to rule. According to Herodotus, the truth came out when Cyrus, still a boy, displayed remarkable leadership qualities in a game with other boys. He was chosen as king in a game, and his authority and justice were so convincing that he punished a noble boy who disobeyed his orders. The noble boy's father, indignant, complained to King Astyages, Cyrus's maternal grandfather. Astyages, investigating the incident, noticed Cyrus's physical resemblance to his daughter Mandane and to himself. Upon interrogating the shepherd Mithridates, the truth came out. The boy was his grandson, whom he had ordered killed years earlier. The discovery of his true lineage was a shock to Cyrus. He who had grown up as a shepherd suddenly found himself a prince, the heir to a dynasty. This revelation not only changed his identity, but also put him on a dangerous path. Astyages, though initially relieved his grandson was alive, still feared the prophecy that Cyrus would dethrone him. From that moment on, Cyrus's life changed dramatically. He was taken to the Median court, where he was educated as a prince, learning the arts of war, diplomacy, and governance. He had access to the best tutors and the knowledge of the Median court, honing his skills and understanding of the world. However, his humble childhood and his experience with common people set him apart from other princes, giving him a unique perspective on life and power. The discovery of his true lineage was the awakening of a king. He understood his destiny and the prophecy that accompanied him. He was ready to embrace his role in history and to challenge the power of his grandfather, Astyages, to fulfill his destiny of unifying the Iranian peoples and building an empire that would be remembered for its tolerance and wisdom. After the discovery of his true lineage, Cyrus was taken to the court of his grandfather, Astyages, the king of the Medes, in Ecbatana. There, he received the education of a prince, a training that would prepare him for leadership and war. Although his childhood as a shepherd had endowed him with unique qualities, the Median court offered him the knowledge and skills necessary to govern an empire. Cyrus was trained in the arts of war, as was expected of every Median prince. He learned to ride with mastery, to use the bow and spear, and to understand military tactics. The Median army was known for its powerful cavalry, and Cyrus would become a master of maneuver warfare. He also learned about the logistics of campaigns and the importance of military discipline. In addition to military training, Cyrus was educated in rhetoric, philosophy, and history. He learned to speak and write in Persian and Median, the languages of the court. He had access to the knowledge of the Median court, which included astronomy, mathematics, and the principles of governance.
This comprehensive education, combined with his natural intelligence, forged in Cyrus a sharp mind and an ability to lead. His experience at the Median court also exposed him to the complexities of politics and diplomacy. He observed the palace intrigues, the alliances, and the rivalries between nobles and generals. He learned to navigate this dangerous environment, to forge alliances, and to distrust his rivals. This experience would be crucial for his future rise to power. Cyrus's education at the Median court was a period of intense learning and preparation. He was being forged as a leader, a man who would combine the resilience and understanding of the common people, acquired in his childhood as a shepherd, with the knowledge and skills of a royal prince. This combination of experiences and learning would make him a unique leader, capable of uniting peoples and building an empire that would be remembered for its tolerance and wisdom.
Despite being educated at the Median court, Cyrus's relationship with his maternal grandfather, Astyages, the king of the Medes, was complex and would eventually transform into an open conflict leading to the fall of the Median Empire. Astyages, although he had spared Cyrus's life in his childhood, still feared the prophecy that his grandson would dethrone him. This latent distrust between grandfather and grandson would be the seed of rebellion. Astyages, a king who had ruled for many years, became increasingly tyrannical and unpopular among his own nobles and generals. His cruelty and distrust of his subjects, including the Persians, who were vassals of the Medes, created an environment of discontent and revolt. Cyrus, who had grown up among the Persians and understood their aspirations for greater autonomy, began to be seen as a potential leader to challenge Median dominance. General Harpagus, the same man who had spared Cyrus's life in his childhood, became one of the main instigators of the rebellion. Harpagus had been brutally punished by Astyages, who forced him to eat his own son's flesh, and he harbored deep resentment against the king. He saw in Cyrus an opportunity to avenge himself on Astyages and promote his own interests. Harpagus began to communicate secretly with Cyrus, encouraging him to rebel and promising him military support. Cyrus's rebellion against Astyages was not an impulsive act. It was the result of years of discontent, conspiracies, and a growing conviction that Median rule was unjust and oppressive. Cyrus, with his charismatic leadership and ability to inspire loyalty, managed to unite the Persian tribes and raise an army to challenge Astyages. He presented himself not just as a rebel, but as a liberator, promising the Persians autonomy and a future of prosperity. The conflict with Astyages was a decisive moment in Cyrus's life and in the history of the Near East. His rebellion was not just a struggle for power, it was a struggle for the freedom and self-determination of the Persians. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide the fate of two empires and the future of a new era.
Cyrus's rebellion against his grandfather Astyages, the king of the Medes, marked the beginning of his rise to power and the foundation of a new empire. In 550 BCE or 549 BCE, Cyrus, with the support of Harpagus and other discontented Median factions, launched his revolt against Median rule. The war between Persians and Medes was a confrontation between two Iranian peoples, but with profound significance for the future of the Near East. Cyrus, with his charismatic leadership and military skill, managed to inspire his men to fight bravely against the numerically superior Median army. He used innovative tactics, taking advantage of Persia's mountainous terrain and the mobility of his cavalry. The decisive battle occurred at Pasargadae, though the exact location is debated, where Cyrus and his Persian forces faced the Median army led by Astyages. The battle was fierce, but the discipline and determination of the Persians, combined with the defection of Harpagus and other Median factions to Cyrus's side, led to the Persian victory. Astyages was captured, and the Median Empire fell. Cyrus's victory was not a brutal conquest, but a transition of power. Cyrus treated Aristides with clemency, sparing his life and keeping him at his court. He also demonstrated a policy of tolerance towards the Medes, incorporating them into his new empire and allowing them to retain their positions and culture. This policy of clemency and integration would be a hallmark of Cyrus's rule, and a striking contrast to the brutality of previous empires, such as the Assyrian. The conquest of the Median Empire by Cyrus marked the birth of the Achaemenid Empire, the first great Persian empire. Cyrus had united the Iranian peoples under his leadership, creating a new power in the Near East. His victory was not only military, it was a political and moral triumph, demonstrating his ability to lead, to inspire, and to build an empire based on tolerance and justice. His journey was just beginning, and the ancient world awaited to be transformed by his vision. After 9 years of glorious conquests in Gaul, Julius Caesar had become the most powerful man in Rome. His military glory and immense wealth, accumulated through plunder and the sale of slaves, rivaled those of Pompey the Great. His army of loyal veterans adored him, and his popularity among the Roman plebs was unmatched. However, Caesar's meteoric rise generated envy and fear among his political rivals in the Senate, who saw him as an existential threat to the Republic. The first triumvirate, the secret alliance between Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, had dissolved. Crassus had died in a disastrous campaign against the Parthians in 53 BCE. The death of Julia, Caesar's daughter and Pompey's wife, in 54 BCE, removed the last family tie uniting the two greatest men in Rome. The rivalry between Caesar and Pompey, which had been contained by the alliance, exploded into a struggle for power. The Senate, dominated by the conservative Optimate faction, led by figures like Cato the Younger, viewed Caesar as a rising tyrant. They feared that, upon returning to Rome with his loyal army, Caesar would use his military power to overthrow the Republic and establish a dictatorship. His prolonged absence from Rome, though necessary for the conquest of Gaul, also allowed his enemies to conspire against him, seeking to undermine his authority and reputation. Tensions escalated rapidly. The Senate demanded that Caesar resign his military command and return to Rome as a private citizen, to face accusations of illegalities during his consulship and his campaigns in Gaul. Caesar, in turn, demanded that Pompey also resign his military command and that both be allowed to run for consul in absentia. The Senate, manipulated by Caesar's enemies, refused to yield. The situation reached a stalemate. Caesar knew that if he returned to Rome as a private citizen, he would be prosecuted and his political career ruined. He had to choose between obeying the Senate and risking his ruin, or defying the Republic and starting a civil war. The fate of Rome was in his hands, and the decision he would make would forever change the course of history. Julius Caesar's decision to defy the Senate's authority and initiate a civil war is one of the most emblematic moments in Roman history. In January 49 BCE, Caesar was encamped with his legion, the Legio XIII Gemina, on the banks of the Rubicon River, a small river marking the border between Cisalpine Gaul province and Italy. Roman law prohibited a general from crossing the Rubicon with an armed army, under penalty of being declared a public enemy. Caesar knew what was at stake. Crossing the Rubicon meant initiating a civil war against the Roman Republic, a war that could cost him everything: his life, his reputation, and the destiny of Rome. He hesitated, pondered the consequences, but his ambition and his determination not to submit to his enemies prevailed. In a moment of deep reflection, he is said to have uttered the famous phrase, "Alea jacta est," the die is cast. With this declaration, Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his legion. There was no turning back. The act of crossing the river was a direct challenge to the Senate and a declaration of war. He was marching on Rome, not as an enemy, but as a defender of his own rights and the Roman plebs, whom he believed were being oppressed by the senatorial aristocracy. News of the Rubicon crossing spread rapidly through Rome, causing panic and confusion. Pompey the Great, who had been appointed by the Senate to defend the Republic, was surprised by Caesar's speed and audacity. He and many senators fled Rome, offering no resistance, abandoning the city to Caesar's advance. The crossing of the Rubicon was not just a military act. It was a political and symbolic act that marked the end of the Roman Republic. It demonstrated Caesar's unwavering determination, his willingness to risk everything to achieve his goals. The fate of Rome was now in the hands of a single man, and the civil war that would follow would tear the empire apart and forever transform the face of the Roman world. Julius Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon triggered the bloodiest and most decisive civil war in Roman history, a direct confrontation between Rome's two greatest generals, Caesar and Pompey the Great. It was a struggle for control of Rome, a battle that would decide whether the Republic would survive or give way to a new form of government. Initially, Caesar acted with speed and surprise, taking control of Italy with little resistance. Pompey and the senators who had fled Rome retreated to Greece, where Pompey, with his vast resources and experience in the East, began to assemble a colossal army. Caesar, lacking a fleet to pursue them immediately, consolidated his control over Italy and Hispania, defeating the legions loyal to Pompey on the Iberian Peninsula. The decisive confrontation between Caesar and Pompey occurred in Greece. The first major battle was at Dyrrhachium, 48 BCE, where Pompey, with a numerically superior army, managed to inflict a defeat on Caesar. However, Caesar managed to avoid annihilation and retreated, seeking a new opportunity for confrontation. The final and decisive battle was at Pharsalus, 48 BCE, in Thessaly, Greece. Pompey, with a much larger army, around 45,000 men against Caesar's 22,000, was confident of victory. However, Caesar, with his tactical genius and the discipline of his veteran legions, managed to crush Pompey's forces. Caesar used a daring tactic, hiding a fourth line of infantry to attack the flank of Pompey's cavalry, which was his main strength. The victory at Pharsalus was overwhelming for Caesar. Pompey, seeing the defeat of his army, fled the battlefield, seeking refuge in Egypt. However, he would be assassinated by order of the young king Ptolemy XIII's advisors, who hoped to please Caesar. Pompey's death marked the end of the civil war and Caesar's victory. The Roman Republic, which had been torn apart by decades of internal conflicts, was now under the control of a single man. The Civil War was a testament to Caesar's military genius and his relentless determination to achieve supreme power. After the victory at Pharsalus and Pompey's death, Julius Caesar did not immediately return to Rome. His journey would lead him on a series of campaigns in the East, which would consolidate his power and bring him into contact with legendary figures. His first stop was Egypt, 48 to 47 BCE, where he became involved in the dynastic dispute between the young Queen Cleopatra VII and her brother Ptolemy XIII. Caesar, fascinated by Cleopatra's intelligence and charisma, sided with her, leading to the Alexandrian Civil War. After months of intense fighting, Caesar and Cleopatra defeated Ptolemy XIII. His stay in Egypt resulted in the birth of Caesarion, son of Caesar and Cleopatra, an event of immense political and personal significance. Leaving Cleopatra on the Egyptian throne, Caesar marched north to Pontus, modern-day Turkey, where he quickly defeated King Pharnaces II, who had taken advantage of the Roman Civil War to expand his kingdom. The victory was so swift and decisive that Caesar is said to have uttered the famous phrase, "Veni, vidi, vici." I came, I saw, I conquered, a testament to his speed and military effectiveness. Back in Rome for a brief period, Caesar had to deal with the remaining Republican opposition. He then departed for Africa, 46 BCE, where the last Pompeian forces, led by Cato the Younger and Scipio, had gathered. The Battle of Thapsus was a decisive victory for Caesar, who crushed the Republican forces. Cato, to avoid capture, committed suicide, becoming a symbol of Republican resistance. These campaigns in the East were not merely military victories. They consolidated Caesar's power and eliminated the last vestiges of organized opposition to his authority. He demonstrated his ability to lead campaigns in different theaters of war and to defeat diverse enemies. Caesar was now the undisputed master of the Roman world, and his return to Rome would be an unprecedented triumph.
After years of wars and conquests, Julius Caesar returned to Rome in 46 BCE, a victorious conqueror and the undisputed master of the Roman world. His entry into Rome was a spectacle of pomp and grandeur, a series of 4 triumphs celebrating his victories in Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Africa. Each triumph was a display of his power, his riches, and his prisoners, a visual reminder of his military glory. Caesar's triumphs were the largest and most spectacular Rome had ever seen. He displayed vast quantities of gold and silver, treasures plundered from his campaigns, and thousands of prisoners, including Vercingetorix, the Gallic leader, who was executed during the triumph. His popularity among the Roman plebs was immense. He distributed money and grain, organized public games and spectacles, and sponsored building projects that benefited the city. With power firmly in his hands, Caesar initiated a series of ambitious reforms in Rome. He was named Dictator Perpetuo, Dictator for Life, a title that conferred absolute power upon him, and which, for many, signaled the end of the Republic. He reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar, which would be used for centuries, reorganized provincial administration, granted Roman citizenship to many conquered peoples, and initiated vast public construction projects. He also sought to reform law and justice, aiming to create a more efficient and equitable system. Caesar was a man of vision, who understood the need to reform the Republic so that it could govern such a vast empire. He believed that the centralization of power was essential for Rome's stability and prosperity. However, his reforms and absolute power generated envy and fear among Republican senators who saw in him a threat to the Republic's freedom and traditions. His ascent to absolute power was a moment of transformation for Rome. The Republic, which had been torn apart by decades of internal conflicts, was now under the control of a single man. Caesar was the master of the Roman world, and his boundless ambition would lead him to dream of new conquests, but also to face the opposition of those who refused to accept the end of the Republic. The stage was set for the final act of Julius Caesar's life.
Julius Caesar's ascent to absolute power, his appointment as dictator for life, and his ambitious reforms generated envy and fear among Republican senators. Although Caesar was popular among the plebs and his veterans, the Roman aristocracy, who had been marginalized and stripped of their power, saw him as an existential threat to the Republic and their own liberties. To them, Caesar was not a reformer, but a rising tyrant, a man who had destroyed Republican institutions and sought to establish a monarchy. The fear of tyranny was real. Rome's history was marked by the expulsion of kings and the founding of the Republic to avoid the rule of a single man. Caesar, by accumulating so much power in his hands, seemed to be reviving the ghosts of the past. His actions, such as sitting in a golden chair in the Senate or having statues erected in his honor, were seen as signs of his monarchical ambition. The conspiracy to assassinate Caesar began to form among a group of senators, many of them former allies and even beneficiaries of Caesar, but who considered themselves defenders of the Republic. The leaders of the conspiracy were Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. Brutus, in particular, was a man respected for his integrity and lineage. He was a descendant of the Brutus who had expelled the last king of Rome, and his participation conferred moral legitimacy on the conspiracy. The conspirators believed that by assassinating Caesar, they would be saving the Republic and restoring Rome's freedom. They saw the act as a necessary sacrifice to preserve Republican values and prevent the rise of a monarchy. The conspiracy was kept secret, with the conspirators meeting in discreet locations and planning the time and place of the assassination. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic and bloody acts in Roman history.
The most infamous day in Roman history, and a turning point for the fate of the Republic. The Ides of March, 44 BCE. On that fateful day, Julius Caesar, the man who had conquered Gaul, won the civil war, and become Rome's dictator for life, was brutally assassinated by a group of conspiring senators. Despite warnings and omens, his wife Calpurnia had a premonitory nightmare, and a soothsayer warned him about the Ides of March. Caesar, with his arrogance and belief in his own destiny, ignored the dangers. He went to the Senate, which was meeting in Pompey's theater, without his personal guard, an act of trust that would prove fatal. Upon entering the Senate, Caesar was surrounded by the conspirators. Publius Servilius Casca was the first to attack him, striking a blow to his neck. Caesar tried to resist, but was overwhelmed by the conspirators, who stabbed him repeatedly. Legend has it that upon seeing Marcus Junius Brutus, one of his protégés and supposedly his illegitimate son, among the assassins, Caesar uttered the famous phrase in Greek, "Kai su teknon," meaning "you too, child," or more commonly, "et tu, brute." This phrase, though likely apocryphal, encapsulates the betrayal and pain of that moment. 23 dagger blows sealed Julius Caesar's fate. He fell at the foot of the statue of his old rival, Pompey the Great, an ironic end for a man who had defeated his enemy and taken control of Rome. Caesar's assassination was a shocking act of violence, a blow intended to restore the Republic, but which, paradoxically, would destroy it forever. The conspirators, believing they had saved the Republic, marched through the Forum, proclaiming freedom. However, the Roman people, who loved Caesar and saw him as their defender, reacted with fury and grief. Caesar's funeral, where Mark Antony, his loyal right-hand man, delivered an inflammatory speech, incited the crowd against the conspirators. Brutus and Cassius, the leaders of the conspiracy, were forced to flee Rome. Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE did not bring the freedom the conspirators hoped for. It plunged Rome into an even deeper chaos. The death of the dictator for life created an immense power vacuum, an abyss that would drag the Roman world into a new and more brutal civil war. Caesar's assassins, who saw themselves as defenders of the Republic, drastically underestimated the reaction of the Roman people and Caesar's loyalists. The immediate consequences were devastating. The Roman people, who loved Caesar and saw him as their benefactor, reacted with fury. Caesar's funeral, where Mark Antony, his loyal right-hand man, delivered an inflammatory speech, incited the crowd against the conspirators. Brutus and Cassius, the leaders of the conspiracy, were forced to flee Rome. Two names immediately stood out as the main heirs to Caesar's vast influence: Mark Antony and Octavian. Mark Antony, a charismatic general and a veteran of countless campaigns, possessed the support of the legions and a formidable reputation as a military leader. He was the obvious figure to inherit Caesar's mantle. However, Caesar's will revealed a shocking surprise. His 18-year-old great-nephew, Octavian,
a young man previously relatively unknown in Roman public life, had been named his principal adopted heir. This act transformed the young Octavian into Antony's main rival, creating a rivalry that would be the driving force behind the next years of civil war. Joining them was Lepidus, another of Caesar's generals, forming the Second Triumvirate. Formally, this pact between Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus primarily aimed to hunt down Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, and restore order in Rome. But in practice, it was an alliance of convenience, marked by mutual distrust and personal ambition. Proscriptions, lists of political enemies to be eliminated and whose properties would be confiscated, returned with brutal force, claiming the lives of thousands of Romans. The civil war that followed was bloody and relentless. The triumvirate forces crushed the armies of Brutus and Cassius at the Battle of Philippi, 42 BCE, avenging Caesar's death. However, the rivalry between Antony and Octavian would intensify, culminating in a new civil war that would decide Rome's fate. Caesar's assassination, far from restoring the Republic, paved the way for the birth of an empire.
Julius Caesar, the name that echoes through the millennia, the conqueror of Gaul, the victor of the Civil War, the dictator for life of Rome. His legacy is immense and multifaceted, a rich tapestry of glory, controversies, and an influence that shaped the Western world for centuries. His military genius is unquestionable. He revolutionized war tactics, demonstrated the importance of speed, siege engineering, and personal leadership on the battlefield. His campaigns became case studies for future generals, and his army a model of discipline and effectiveness. He was one of history's greatest commanders. As a politician and reformer, Caesar was a man of vision. He understood the need to reform the Republic so that it could govern such a vast empire. His reforms to the calendar, provincial administration, and law had a lasting impact. He paved the way for the Roman Empire, and his name became synonymous with power and authority. Hence the titles Caesar, Kaiser, and Czar.
His figure has become a cultural icon, inspiring countless works of literature, art, theater, and cinema. From Shakespeare to Hollywood, Caesar continues to be a source of fascination, a symbol of power, ambition, and tragedy. His life is a testament to the power of a single man to change the course of history, to transform a republic into an empire, and to leave an indelible mark on Western civilization. Julius Caesar, the man who crossed the Rubicon, who conquered Gaul, and who, with his ambition and genius, transformed Rome forever. His life was an epic saga of power, war, and destiny, a testament to the power of a visionary leader. He taught us that limits are only those we impose on ourselves, and that the price of glory can be life itself. The Roman Empire, born from the ashes of the Republic and Caesar's legacy, would embark on a new chapter of its history, facing the challenges of consolidation, expansion, and the maintenance of power.